Texas, participating in a lecture series there, so he won't be back in town here till Friday. Him and Linda are there. And so I'm going to pick up where he left off last Wednesday night. So that will be chapter 23 of Acts. And we'll begin with verse 23. Before we enter into the study, let's bow and we'll have a quick word of prayer. Father, we are so blessed to be able to be here this evening, to be together, to open your word and to delve into it. We're thankful that we still have it preserved for us. It's a great blessing, and we appreciate it so much. We thank you for all the blessings that you give us. Please be with those of our number that are traveling. There are quite a few that are traveling, so please be with them. But also, especially, we have some of our number that have had great impacts to their health and various kinds of things, but all of them quite intrusive. And we pray that you would be with them and help them to regain a better and more natural portion of their health. If we can help in any way, we pray that we might have that chance, that opportunity to do that. Please help us to focus on At this time, may we all do the best we can to focus and to put the thoughts of the world from our minds. In your Son's name, amen. Testing? No. Okay. All right, so we're picking up in chapter 23. And this is the rundown, if you will, of Paul's ability to be free, to be about. I know that he may have one other chance to do that after being in prison for a while. But we're headed down to him going to prison in around chapter 60. He'll begin his way to there. He'll be in Rome. And so we've just finished Paul being saved, if you will, by the commander of the centurions. And it looked like his life was at risk, and we see that even further develop in beginning in verse 12 of this chapter, 12 down to 25, where the Jews had made a plot and bound themselves with an oath that they were going to find some way to kill Paul. And so, fortunately, a relative of his clued in the commander that was going to happen, and that got avoided. And so tonight we pick up after that has gone on. You know, from up to this point and now beyond, it doesn't sort of appear that there's a whole lot more going on here than just what we're reading. In other words, time and time again, Paul is helped, saved, kept from being detoured from what he is ultimately headed to do, and that is to go to Rome. And so even in this case, like it did back, remember in Ephesians when they were going to drag, Paul wanted to go out and into the arena there, and there was all kind of rioting going on, and so even then, he had friends in high places, okay? Had even officials come to tell him, no, don't go in there, okay? In a way, for me anyway, that kind of continues a little bit as he interacts now with Felix and with Festus. He seems to have the ability to, if not make friends of them, have them be more than treat him better than they might have treated other people in a similar situation. So let's read this tonight. We're going to try our best to get through this reading here and then 24. And then Collie said I could do 25, too. And so like him, I won't make it, I'm sure. So let's pick up here in chapter 23, verse 23. And I'm going to read all of what's on the chart right now, and break it up only in twos, and then we can kind of talk about what's said here. So he says, then he called 2 of the centurions and said, get ready 200 soldiers with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go as far as Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Also provide mounts for Paul to ride and bring him safely to Felix the governor. And he wrote a letter to this effect. Claudius Lysias, to his excellency, the governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them when I came upon them with the soldiers and rescued him. And desiring to know the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. Okay, so when you look at what has gone on and what now begins to happen, Paul has or is in sort of the hands of the government, right? I mean, the commander was a Roman, and he was the commander of several centurions, which means they were leaders of 100 soldiers apiece, right? Centurion, 100. And so they are going to be offering him safety, okay, to get before His Excellency Felix. Did you look up Felix a little bit to see what kind of man Felix was? You know, he was considered to be by them His Excellency, but really he was pretty much a scoundrel. Okay? I mean, that was his history. That was how he had been. That was his I would say his ancestry. Okay, he was actually a former slave. And so this is an interesting insight, a look into how the Romans dealt with law, each other, courts, etc. Who was royally accepted, if you will, and so on. If they liked you, you could almost do nothing wrong. Now, that's not exactly true, because Felix will ultimately be called back to Rome and put on trial because of his mismanagement. Okay, but that happens later, and we'll talk about that a little more when we get to that point. Do you see anywhere in here in his letter that the commander wrote any difference between what you know to be reality of what really happened? So spinning things is not only a modern phenomena, is it? Okay, so he did do a little spinning here in his letter. How did he come to know that Paul was a Roman citizen? Pardon? Yeah, he told him after the commander had him on, splayed out, ready to be beaten, right? Because that was also seemingly one of the ways that they dealt with prisoners. Instead of waiting to find out what, and try to do the investigation, they would try to beat the truth out of the person, okay? And so that's what he was headed to do with Paul. But Paul says, Paul brings up the point that I am a Roman citizen, okay? So it's a little bit of a spin here on the true circumstances here. But one thing that was stated by Lysias in verse 29 is quite interesting, because he's already made sort of a conclusion, hasn't he? What has he concluded about Paul already? I can't hear. Okay, he thinks he's heard only questions about their sort of squabbles, my word for that, but that's kind of how it comes off, how they kind of view the interaction between Paul and the Jewish leaders at the time to kind of be squabbling over the law and their own law and things like that. And he really doesn't see any charges here that deserve death or imprisonment, okay? which I think is interesting, that he put that in the letter that he sent to to Felix. Do you have any other comments? We're going to read on the rest of the next few verses here, unless you have something you want to add. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, several opportunities for this not to happen here, just like there were several opportunities for Jesus to not be crucified, but he was turned over to them. And even later, however, Paul kind of took his destiny, right, into his own hands, all right, and he was pretty perceptive, I think, and so he brought the idea up that, hey, I'm a Roman citizen. What are you doing? And from that moment on, everything changed, right? Everything changed for him, and I think that is partly why also these men that the Romans had put in charge were a little careful about what they even did. So let's pick up then let's go down in verse 31. So the soldiers, according to their instructions, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. Okay, so that's about 35 miles from Jerusalem, which is about halfway to where they're headed. Okay, so they're going to take him to Caesarea, and this is about halfway there, a little over that. And on the next day, they returned to the barracks, letting the horsemen go on with him. And when they had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they presented Paul also before him. On reading the letter, he asked what province he was from. And when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing when your accusers arrive. And he commanded him to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. Why do you think he asked Paul where he was from? Okay, that could be one reason. Felix was even a little hopeful. If Paul's not from my area, I'm not going to have to deal with this, But since he was in Felix's area and from his area, he was going to have to deal with it. And so he then goes on and handles this interaction with Paul. This was no small matter anymore, if you will. When you take 200 men, now think about it. Here's 200 men, all the horses, all of the trappings, the wagonry, all the stuff that has to go with this move, okay, to take him to Felix. I don't know all the reasons why, other than the fact that he knew that there were men that were trying to kill Paul. But I do think that the commander made sure that Paul was going to reach his destination, especially after writing a letter. That letter was going to go to Felix. If anything happened to Paul, then it would be his issue to deal with. Okay, so we've now brought Paul into to Caesarea, and now he's going to sit before Felix. Okay, so Paul now appears before Felix, and so we pick up here in the 24th chapter and begin with verse 1. It says, and after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and a spokesman, one Tertullus. They laid before the governor their case against Paul. And when he had summoned Tertullus, began to accuse him, saying, since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation, in every way and everywhere we accept this with all gratitude. So what's he doing? I mean, we kind of learned this, right? If you want to get someone on your side, okay, we call it you butter them up, right? All right, so he's really laying it on, okay? And it seems to me that the elders were a little bit, now they were pretty good at spinning themselves, but they would be considered how would I put it, amateurs, okay? And so Tertullus is the professional, right, in this matter. Pick up with verse 4 then. But to detain you no further, I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly. For we have found this man a plague. If you look at that word up, that word actually means pest. Okay, so we found Paul to be a pest. Okay, he's a pestilence. Okay, and he says one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world, and is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to find out from him about everything of which we accuse him. How far did I go up there? 8, 9. Okay. And then it says, verse 9, the Jews also joined in the charge, affirming that all these things were so. Okay. So who comes down then to, accuse Paul? These are religious leaders, aren't they? Of the from Jerusalem to come and to accuse Paul of all of these terrible, horrible things that he had been doing. Call him a pest. So that it kind of falls into three accusations. He's a pest. He stirs up dissension. He tried to desecrate the temple. Probably the weakest of that, at least in the Romans' eyes, was the temple. I don't think that was really part of, the concern for them, other than it was kind of exercising the Jews, right? And so they did not like to do that. So these three things are really the charges against Paul. And I think that when we look at this, the middle section where I think it's part of verse 2, trying to win over, if you will, Felix seemed to be a hard thing. Okay, I mean, I don't think Felix really listened much to what was being presented to him to try to win him over, and we'll see that a little bit later. Their accusations to him, maybe the idea of him being a pest or pestilence, I don't think that had too much of a sway. But probably the second one, stirring up riots, that was a no-no, even in that time, and even in with the Romans being in charge. They did not want that to get back to Rome, right? So anyone who was had provided insurrection, anyone that was rioting, etc., they would try to shut that down as quickly as they possibly could. So that might have been something they could have held against him. Now, there's probably something that stands out here, and let's go to my next slide here. You probably noticed that there is a verse that's not shown here in the English Standard Version and in the NIV version, and that's verse 7 here. It's not really a secret why it's not. There are some of the manuscripts, King James, New King James has this in. Versions has this verse in there. I think the NASB has it in brackets. They put it in, but they put brackets around it, and it's because there are some manuscripts, especially some early manuscripts and later manuscripts, that don't have that verse in there, and some do have that verse in there. So when you look at what that verse would have said if it was in there, it says, and we would have judged him according to our law, but the chief captain, Lysias, came and with great violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come before you. Now, in a way, that if that was the verse that belonged in there, and that wording that's in there, what's it sound a little like? Is there a little blame kind of being laid there? Probably a little blame against Lysias, right? Because we would have handled this. We wouldn't have brought it before you and wasted your time. We'd have taken care of this in Jerusalem if only he hadn't taken Paul out of our hands by force. And you can look at some of this. You can look some of this up yourself as to these manuscripts and some that have it, some that don't have it. We're not going to go into a lot of it here. But what you'll find that this is not the only verses that this is true of in different versions, different interpretations, if you will, of early manuscripts. But in almost every case, it doesn't really matter, because in the end, this wording here, okay, you take it out, it doesn't really affect the outcome of this text, okay? And we know this because if you looked at chapter 23 and verse 10 of Acts, it answers the question what Lysias did. He did that exact thing, right? He went and took Paul by force, right? By force, out of their hands. So you can see that it doesn't really, the wording here, the inclusion of it or non-inclusion of it, doesn't change the text at all, does it? Because we already know, yeah, that's what Lysias, that's what he did. Okay, he went and grabbed Paul out of the hands of this group of violent people that were trying to kill him. All right, so now if you would like to look at some of that more, there is a book I like. It's called How We Got the Bible, and it's written by Neil Lightfoot. Okay, and now, it's not, you don't have to be a scholar to read it, but you need to be motivated. Okay, so it's going to talk about early manuscripts, when they were found, what was found, what they're called, etc., where they were found, and he covers that very well and explains what I just talked about so much better than I do and I did. But he will even demonstrate this fact that in most cases, probably almost 100% of the cases, the context is not impacted by these changes. So they were copied by hand, and man, if you're like me, okay, I skip things sometimes, or you might add some things in there once in a while. But what I like about that book is it reinforces why you can believe the Bible that we have, and that you can follow it and be confident in it. Okay, let's go on then. Any question? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, he will be telling them that directly to his face. It is interesting to me in all cases, everyone who he stood in front of to talk to, he had an influence with them, and I think it's very interesting. Felix was not a good guy, okay, but I think he too was moved and was cautious with dealing with Paul because of, like you said, because Paul was not there to win any votes, okay, and that part did not matter to him. All right, let's look then at the next reading here. So the last part here where he called what they call him plague and the Jews joining in and affirming these things. So Paul's going to fight back. Fight's probably the wrong word. He's going to explain very carefully and very clearly where they are wrong. Okay. So now the governor now nods to him and says, you have your chance now to give your side of the story. So let's pick up verse 10. And when the governor had nodded to him to speak, Paul replied, knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem. So, and they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogues or in the city. So which one of the accusations has Paul just addressed? Pardon? Yeah, I'm a rioter. And if you don't believe me, it's only been 12 days since this happened. I'm sure you can find witnesses, that will attest to this fact, okay, of what happened, all right? And so then he hits at the Jews. He says, neither can they prove to you what they now bring against me. One thing that there's several, let's say, levels of things going on here, I feel. Okay, so one of them is, where is Paul ultimately going to end up? Rome, all right? He's going to end up in Rome. And when you see how he reacts and how he responds to these accusations, you can see that that's his number one goal. And why would that be a goal? Why would he even be thinking about that at this time? Because Jesus, right, told him, you're going to be telling this message in Rome. Okay? So he knows this is going to happen. This is coming up. This is my direction, what I'm going to be doing. Okay. And so I think that kind of wouldn't that not kind of buoy you up a little? Wouldn't that kind of support you some? If you find yourself in this position, but you already know because the Lord told you what ultimately was going to happen. All right, let's continue then. But this I confess to you, that according to the way, okay, so what did they call that? They say they called it a sect, but what sect did they call it? They sort of snidely call it the sect of the Nazarenes, right? A cult of the Nazarenes. But Paul prefers what? To use the phrase, the way. Which they call a sect. I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. This is the very reason the Jews have him here, isn't it? And up till now, they've been trying to silence him. And every time they've taken a step to do that, they've been thwarted, and he's had a broader audience to teach this to. Then verse 16, so I always take pains to have a clear conscience toward both God and man. That's a strong statement, isn't it? Now, after several years, I came, am I going beyond my, yeah, I did, sorry. All right, so I've got some underlining I skipped. Okay. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience toward both God and man. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. Okay, we know that, right? I mean, we've been actually studying that here. Paul has been, and when we studied Corinthians, when Matt taught Corinthians, we see Paul has been trying to get this offering together and to bring it to Jerusalem. And that's what he did. That's why he was there. Okay. Not to riot, not to cause insurrection, not to bring someone into the temple that didn't belong there, etc. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple without any crowd or tumult. But some Jews from Asia, and then he takes, the dash means there's a little pause there for effect. They ought to be here, by the way, before you, and to make an accusation should they have anything against me. So those that came down, or up, if you will, the way they were, up to Jerusalem to, in this case, to find fault with him, they're not even there, right? They're not even there to present their case, right, to them. While I was doing this, they found me purified. In verse 19, they ought to be there, they ought to be here. Verse 20, or else let these men themselves say what wrongdoing they found when I stood before the council. Other than this one thing that I cried out while standing among them, it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial here before you this day. So in Paul's defense, the outline that you see there of that defense, how does that strike you? The words he used, what he taught them, is that not the gospel? Is that not what we hope for? We hope for resurrection. We could be standing right with him under trial, couldn't we? Because we hope for resurrection. And we see the trouble that's back from the Lystra and Derbe days and all of that continuing, don't we? Following him all the way through to this point in time. And him having to defend himself once again. But he spent most of his life after he was converted on the road in Damascus. He spent most of the rest of his life really having to stay alive so that he could do what he was being asked to do. I do think it's interesting that rather than the sect of the Nazarenes, it seems Paul prefers this phrase of the way. And I think it's partly comes from John 14 and verse 6, where Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. Right? And I think that phrase is where they got that from. He got that phraseology from. What does Paul suggest here is the real reason that the high priest, Ananias, and the Jewish elders oppose him? Yeah, because if there is a resurrection of the dead, that undermines all of what they are trying to accomplish, doesn't it? That there will be a judgment of the righteous and the unrighteous, and that there will be punishment for the wicked, and there will be a resurrection for the righteous, and that undermines really their whole approach to their religion of the day. And Paul was in the temple for righteous reasons. Now that time has passed, I doubt seriously that Felix and them really care what that was, but that was partly what they used to falsely accuse Paul of taking a Gentile into the temple with him. So here in verse, let's read on then a little bit further. It says, Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, put them off, saying, when Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. Why do you think he waited? Why do you think he pushed that off? Why didn't he just release Paul? Because Paul's going to stay in jail now. He's going to stay in bounds. Pardon? I declare. Yeah. So, but why do you think that Felix here, it says here, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way. So, what Paul has said here, the implication I take from that is he knew this. Okay, he knew this. All right. Think slyness. Okay. Think a fox. All right, because that's who we're dealing with here in Felix. Okay, and we're going to find out later that also is what happened with Festus. He wants to favor to build favor with the Jews, doesn't he? Because he could have easily released Paul then, because he knew that at that time, at that point, that there were no real charges that were going to stick. And he could have let him go then, but he didn't. It's just, as was already said, it's just like when Jesus was brought, and several times he could have been released, right? Several times, but they would not do it because of trying to gain favor with the Jews. Then he gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody, but have some liberty, that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. Is Paul a prisoner or isn't Paul a prisoner? I mean, what does this kind of look like to you? Well, we know Felix hangs on to Paul because he wanted to get a bribe. We're told that, right, later here. But in the reading. But Felix was known to be mean, corrupt, abusive. But we don't see that happening here with Paul, do we? And whether he is frightened by what Paul said, frightened by knowledge and by, I think, and possibly frightened by Paul's willingness, to stand before him, risking his life to make these statements. But Paul's kept in custody, right? But his friends could come and visit him. Right? And that's part of the deal, right? Because if the friends come and they're taking care of his needs, they don't have to, for one thing. But then second, also, maybe they'll provide some bribe for him. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was a Jewish, and he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. And as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, "Go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you." I kind of sometimes when I read this and try to compare it to some of the writings that Paul had to send to, Thessalonians and the Corinthians and them, defending himself, against them, that he was weak in presence, that, that he was strong in absence and strong in his writing, but weak in presence, etc. But I don't really see that. This interaction here from this point on until he is taken to Rome, I don't see that as his personality. I see his conviction winning over someone that's basically a scoundrel. Now, he didn't act right. He didn't follow through, did he? But it did affect him. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul, so he sent for him often and conversed with him. Now, Felix, just like many who lead in a corrupt manner, know a lot about the people that they're dealing with, if you know what I mean. So he had a lot of insight. Felix had a lot of insight into the people he was dealing with. So he knew very well what Paul was teaching him and what he was saying to him. And in this case here, when he's affected by it, and yet he continues to call Paul to him to try to see if some way he can, weasel some kind of a favor or some kind of money, graft, whatever, from him. When 2 years had elapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. Okay, so Paul's now going to be waiting another 2 years, right, after this, before he is actually able to take to the next step, if you will. Now let's look at this just for a little bit, okay? Let me see what else I have here. Okay, that's the next chapter. Okay, this idea of being succeeded, if you investigate what happened in this time period, Felix was taken out of office, okay, and was ultimately sent back to Rome and had to face charges about his misadministration. And he was known to be a wasteful person who spent a lot that he didn't have of the government's money, et cetera, et cetera. He went back and he actually faced death back in Rome during this time, but he was able to escape that because he had a brother who was favored by the royals, and so he was able to keep him from being killed. All right, so Paul's here in prison. Friends are coming to help minister to him, and then Festus takes over for Felix. Let's read a couple more. We have a little more time, so let's go into 25 minutes so I can tell Collie that we did. So now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem and Caesarea. So now he's a new guy, right? He's a new guy. He's going to have to be convinced all over again. Paul's going to have to make his defense all over again. This has happened to us, right? When you get a new boss at work, okay, and the old boss said, hey, I promised that raise is going to come, in 1 month or whatever, and all of a sudden you get a new boss. What's the new boss say? Time out, I need to get to know you better, that sort of thing. So here comes Festus now, and so he's going to have to hear the charges again. Verse 2. I think I have this up here. Okay. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him against asking as a favor against Paul. All right, so this is really the ultimate spin on this. That he summoned him to Jerusalem because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Okay, so this is yet another, this is still like, all right, how long has this been? 2 years, right? And they still have this much hate. They still have this drive, this desire to kill Paul. So much so they make plans to do it. All right, so they want Festus to bring Paul to Jerusalem from Caesarea so that they can kill him on the way. And we'll just a couple more thoughts. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea, and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there is anything wrong about this man, let them bring charges against him. And he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, and he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. And then this picks up sort of where we started, right? So where we started with Felix, that's where we're at here in the seventh verse here of chapter 25. So that's going to begin again. The arguments are going to begin. But I think that Paul gets his chance again to make his defense. You're not going to get to that till chapter 26, but it's a much broader defense that he offers before Festus. They are quite the couple, okay, Festus and Bernice. So we'll let Kali discuss that next time. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So normally, Matt would come up and would say a few words. And so I'm going to do that at this time, and then we'll have a song and a prayer and be dismissed. But just a couple of updates. If you have the bulletin, from Sunday, just a couple of updates to what's on there. I understand that Gail is at Northdale Rehab. Okay, so she was able to get from the hospital to there. So let's remember her in our prayers. Rehab has a whole new meaning to me. Okay, with Peg has gone through her knee thing, so it's this is going to be something that she'll have to work hard at. It seems Belinda's procedure that was going to happen tomorrow is now delayed. Okay, so let's remember her as she continues to try to make that happen. I didn't really have an update on Sandra, what was happening with Sandra here lately, with her myasthenia gravis issues. And then Geraldine Chastain is still at home. We have announced her before, but she's going to be home for a little while longer. She has a doctor's appointment coming. She wants to wait until after that before she comes back. Now, there's many of our numbers that are out and about. And so let's remember, so George couldn't go, but George's family is in Tennessee. Kali, as I mentioned, Kali and Linda are in Pasadena. I think what didn't make it on here, I believe that Matt is in Ocala for a Wednesday night, some kind of a, sort of like a lecture thing or something there too. Okay, so let's remember them while they're away. One thing to keep in our minds is Ray's mother, Donna Madrigal. That her address was on the bulletin, so if you'd care to send her a card, just to let her know that we're thinking of her, it is on there. Okay. I think that's all. I think Ed and Jerry were up north in North Florida, and they went over to see Dan and Debbie. All right, so they'll be back here, I believe, sometime tonight. Okay, so at this time, then we'll have a song, and then we'll be dismissed with prayer.